America is seeing levels of polarization that the nation has not experienced since the Civil War. Conservatives and liberals can no longer see eye to eye on a single issue, and we're getting closer and closer to the point where violence begins breaking out. It wasn't all that long ago, maybe just a few decades, where it wouldn't be uncommon to see Republicans and Democrats voting similarly on different policies and having comparable values. Today, that is almost unheard of. As liberals grow more and more extreme and conservatives become more and more resentful to those destroying their country, this polarization is only going to get worse. And we're to the point where secession may not only be inevitable, but it may just be completely necessary. It may be the only way to save any form of conservative Christian values within this land that we hold so close to our collective hearts. This nation is becoming more liberal, and with that, you have more Satanism and more just complete degeneracy. And eventually, this nation will collapse, and we have to make the decision, are we going to be part of this collapse? And are we going to fulfill this satanic order that our nation is currently a part of? Or are we going to split off, take charge, and try to, save this land and save some of our people and save our communities with it? Because secession may, at this point, be the only way that is possible. But again, it's seeming that collapse is becoming more and more inevitable as there are lots of signs that our globalistic empire at this point cannot continue going on in the current direction that it's going, especially with two groups of people whose values are on such different levels. I mean, on the conservative end, you have pro Christianity, you have a group of people that value tradition, value the traditional roles that people are supposed to fit in. It's the party of reality at this point, right? And I don't mean party as in like Republican, Democrat, because, both parties are significantly flawed. So when I say that, I'm talking about true conservatives, right? Again, the party of God. It's a group of people that are actually trying to promote some kind of morality. On the opposite side of that, you have a group that just hates everything that conservatism represents, and that's why they hate us. They view us as our complete enemies. Conservatives have a large amount of disdain for liberals because they are actively destroying everything we care about, destroying our communities. While liberals hate us because we represent everything that is the opposite of their ideals, right? While we worship God, they worship themselves, which is an act of Satanism. While we care about life and cherish it, they cherish the idea of the ability to kill those who have a negative impact on you, kill children. Not even a negative impact necessarily, but a uncomfortable impact, I think would be the better terminology here, right? Having kids, it's a tough decision and it requires selflessness. And since liberalism is a complete worship of the self, they have to be able to literally sacrifice babies. And unless we move away from that, unless we are able to leave this satanic empire, we are a part of it. We are a part of every single one of those murders. So here I'm going to talk about the coming societal collapse, the elements of a revolution, how we can succeed, what states are on our side, and at the end I'm going to put together a complete victory plan for us. That way, if we ever choose that this is a route that is completely necessary, we're ready. So, yeah, I'm going to quickly jump into that, starting with the signs of our empire coming to collapse. So there are 7 key signs of a society that is falling apart. At number 1, you have the fixation on some form of ideology, which is not universally supported by the public, that has a lot of backlash, that, it doesn't actually work. Once people actually think about it logically, that's a big sign of an empire coming to the end. And here we have this social justice movement, a movement that lots of people like to jump on, they like to piggyback on top of, but it honestly doesn't have a lot of support because it goes against all aspects of reality. It promotes this lie of complete equality. And if you disagree with me there, you probably just don't understand what I mean by equality, what the social justice movement is actually fighting for. So at the end of this video, go check out my last one on the greatest lie ever told, which is, the lie of equality, a lie that has been spread throughout the American populace so easily. So, yeah, at number one here, we are fixated on this social justice movement, which is not really actually supported by the vast majority, by the public. At number two, you have the superiority of amusement, your bread and circuses, if you will. So, here in America, we put our desires above all else. You take care of your desires, you make sure that you are happy, and then if you have extra time, you might take care of a few responsibilities. And this is a great cause of so much purposelessness, so much unhappiness in the current American society, right? Here we put our sports, we put video games, we put movies, we put pornography above all else. You know, you have these video games, you have these movies, you have these complete worlds created that pulls people out of actual reality and they begin making shrines. I mean, go inside of a large majority of young men's rooms today, and they have this iconography of all these different movie franchises, of all these different video games, right? And they literally are borderline worshiping them. They live their lives through these characters. It's a very, very dangerous thing because it makes it so they put their responsibilities last, and much more damaging than video games, movies, sports, whatever you want to put there. We have pornography, something that young men are being introduced to extremely early and getting hooked on immediately. It is the greatest weapon against the American public. At number three, you have government corruption. Of course, even maybe you make the argument, oh, our government isn't corrupt, but guess what? Pretty much everybody believes it is because guess what? It definitely is. We have the people who seem to have bad things happen to them when they're friends with the Clintons, for example. You have everything that went on in the Obama administration. I'm going to not get into specifics because this is on YouTube and I don't want this video taken down because I think it's kind of important. So I'm going to be careful with my words, but I mean, I'm sure the majority of you know what I'm talking about here. You have the Biden crime family. I mean, yeah, our president is one of the most corrupt people in the nation. People don't even believe in elections anymore. That's how bad it is right now. There is a vast amount of government corruption. People no longer have any faith in the current systems that are being upheld. At number four, you have the degrading public health, right? We have an obesity epidemic in this nation. People are fatter than ever. People are becoming more and more unattractive because of these health decisions that are honestly borderline being forced upon them. And it's not just physical health in this nation that is being corrupted and destroyed, it's our mental health as well. And what is the government's answer? Send you to pharmaceutical companies and hook you on forever drugs because that will take care of all your health problems. I'm here to call bullshit on that. Number five, you have nutritional challenges, right? In this nation, we have poisoned food, poisoned water. Our government is doing nothing to help it. In fact, the government is the one encouraging these companies to poison our supply. And that's creating a lot of resentment within the people. At number six, you have a push of globalism. It's this expansion of an empire at the detriment of its citizens. We have a few big examples of this right now, right? You have the Ukraine conflict going on. And of course, in Ukraine, we put a bunch of money, a bunch of funding to a nation that is not our own, despite having a vast amount of problems and a vast amount of debt in our country. This also goes for Israel right now. Same idea. Honestly, Israel is probably a more evil country, but I'm not going to get into that right here. And just overall, you have the expansion of the EU and of NATO powers. At number seven, you have Forever Wars. And is this not the most American thing ever? Forever Wars, right? I mean, right now, for the last 20, 25 years, it seems we've been in conflict with the Middle East. And it's only seeming to get worse, right? We're about to go to conflict again with them due to Israel. So, these Forever Wars, they vastly, vastly decrease morale. So there you go. There's your seven signs that our empire is coming to a collapse, and why a secession and revolutionary movement, a massive social change, seems borderline inevitable. Now, there are also elements that lead to a revolution, and I'm going to get into those as well right here, part of this section. There are five main elements that lead to revolution. And number one, you have this economic and fiscal strain. This is, of course, massive here right now. Massive inflation. You have only the wealthy today can get property. You have a massive wealth gap going on. The middle class is being destroyed, and that creates a lot of fiscal and economic challenges for the majority of the population. Your second element that a revolution is coming is alienation and opposition ag- against the elites. People no longer feel that elitists are even real people at this point. They seem to just be facades. There's no real connection, and everything they do seems to be harming the American public. At number three, you have widespread and popular anger against injustice. Now, when I talk about this, I'm not talking about social justice because that isn't relevant to the conservative cause. However, there is a legitimate widespread anger against the injustices committed against conservatives today. We have the bannings on conservatives across all kinds of social media platforms, constant attacks, and it seems the government and those who are meant to protect us don't care. It feels they don't care about us, and that's creating legitimate anger against the state by conservatives. You also have a persuasive shared narrative of resistance. More than ever, conservatives are starting to feel connected, especially those who are putting Christ first. They're feeling like it's them against the world. Nobody in our political system seems to be representing us. None of them seem to actually be on our team. Every single one that has ever promoted anything that benefits us, it seems that they've either gone back on it or two, they've done something that is just irredeemable. Our politicians are not on our side, and it feels like it's us against not only these liberal neighbors that are trying to constantly attack us, but also those we've put into power that are supposed to be representing us. Finally, you also have to have favorable international relations for a revolution to even happen. Now, this one's probably going to be the most challenging for conservatives because, it's not great for the EU, for Canada, for Australia, pretty much all of NATO if the current American regime falls apart. Because, I mean, we are protecting all of them, we are funding them, we are easy to take advantage of. The current American regime is somewhat weak, and it's good for all these countries because it means we support them and we support their devilish desires that many of them have. However, there are a few nations that one would be interested in a collapse of the current American regime, right? Some of our enemies, Russia, China, the Middle East. It would be pretty favorable for the current American globalist empire to fall apart. So, one, they may support a possible secessionist movement if we actually stuck to our word and truly were an American first group that wanted a little bit more isolationism, because that is one less enemy that they have to deal with. There's also countries that are going further and further right in Europe, for example. The Netherlands could potentially be a country that would put us in a favorable view. But again, that's the most challenging. That will be what makes or breaks the revolution, to be completely honest with you. But now we've covered, the signs of a societal collapse, the elements of the coming revolution. But now we have to ask ourselves, who would actually be in support of this? So I've made a list of three groups of states. On one end, you have your very, very democratic states. I'm going to call these states the unionists, right? These are the states that are wanting to keep together a union. There would be zero shot of them ever seceding. There's no way they would join our movement. And then on the other end, you have two groups. I call both of these groups nationalists. One, I have the Midwest nationalists, and one, I have the Southern nationalists. I'd expect these two groups to be very closely tied with each other. However, there is going to be a large cultural aspect in this, and the Midwest nationalist states would feel more comfortable if they stuck together, like the nationalist Southern states would feel more comfortable if they stuck together. You need at least like two Midwest states to secede in order for the rest of the Midwest states to secede, and then you need like two Southern states to secede for the rest of the South to secede. So the only reason I separated these two groups is because it's completely possible only one of the two groups would actually follow through with this. However, I would expect both of them to go through, and you'd essentially probably have either two nations that are very, very closely tied with one another, or you would have just one large nation that would start as two different movements. But the movements are going to be tied. So when I have those two different states, don't think that there's going to be any conflict between the two. I'm sure there will be minor conflict, as there's always minor conflict in a political revolution, a massive political change, a reformation, if you will. But those two sides, they're allied. That's why they're both under the nationalistic title. I also have some key states, some states that I think will be massively important. And that's kind of based off of these these pivotal cities. I have them all marked on my map here. One, College Station, Texas. Going to be the most pivotal city in starting any kind of serious movement because it's a very conservative city with a massive, massive youth population. And the youth, they lead revolutions, they lead social change. Especially, I expect Gen Z to be all for this. Gen Z is going to have to be the ones that step up. So I expect a city like College Station to be massively important. Texas overall is going to be very important. I also have Columbia, South Carolina circled here, another just young conservative state, and also Clarksville, Tennessee. Same reasons as the two others I listed. These are, again, just pivotal cities where anything important happens, it's going to start here. So now we've categorized the states. We've figured out, what's going on, right? We know who our potential allies are going to be. Again, I do want to preface this before I move on. I have some swing states that are um, separated strongly into this unionist or nationalistic category. That's because there's certain swing states that just culturally will end up going with what the rest of their geography around them goes. I expect if we play this right. I have a few toss-up states listed here on the map that I'm showing you now. Nevada, I fully expect would end up joining the unionists. However, I just think there's a chance, depending on the timing, that they would joined the Midwest movement. Ohio, I'd expect them to go with us if we play it right with timing. I expect them to be a nationalistic group. They'd probably be part of the southern one just because you have Illinois there splitting um, Indiana and Ohio from the rest of the Midwest. That's the only reason they're part of this southern movement on my map, by the way. And finally, you have Alaska. Alaska fits all the needs to be part of the secessionist movement. However, geographically, I don't see how it could work. So I'm leaving them as a toss up because I just can't predict what they're going to end up doing. But yeah, there you go. There's all the states that I have on our side. But, we get all these states on our side. We get this secessionist movement going. We need a victory plan. We need to play this smart or it won't work. There's a reason the first secessionist movement in America, the first Civil War, failed. And it's because, they weren't prepared to win necessarily, right? They they tried to overexpand. They made a few mistakes with foreign relations. Timing wasn't perfect, and it caused them to lose. If you play the game not to lose, you won't lose, and that's typically how war goes. So we need to put a no loss first, right? We have to make sure we do everything in our power not to lose. We need to not worry too much about conquering the states, conquering the unionists, because that's not important to us. All that's important to us is that we get our key states, we have them supporting us, we have a solid amount to seed, and we can, work with them to create a legitimate defense against anything the unionists could potentially throw at us. So, first of all, we need to look into the conditions for a successful revolution. You need mass frustration, you need dissident elites, you need powerful unifying motives, you need a severe crisis paralyzing state powers, and you need permissive outer nations. So, our victory plan has to follow all of these things. The most important of everything here is we have to get the timing right. We have to make sure the severe crisis is playing out when we start making major movements. What it seems the US is about to do is get into a major conflict. And while we don't really want war, right? It's not good. It'll send our young boys to go die. There is potential we can use it to our advantage. If we wait for a major conflict with with US involvement, It will distract, their politicians, our leaders, our security groups, and it may allow for us to have a little bit more allowance in creating a revolutionary movement with a little less security going on inside of our own borders. And on top of that, a conflict would decrease US morale, increasing support for us. At this point, key figures such as Nick Fuentes and other, America First Christian nationalist leaders should start going on a tour. We need them giving speeches in the key cities that I outlined earlier, and just these key areas. And I'll outline some of the key states we need on our side in a second. I know I had some on our map. However, there are a few others I want to cover because the ones I had on the map were more specific to those three cities that I was talking about. But we need these key figures to start giving speeches and start increasing unification within our party, within our group. We must inspire our populace, but we have to be covert with the way we do it. That way we aren't garnering unwanted attention from, government organizations. Another big thing we have to start doing pretty early on before we do anything massive is we need to start a big funding operation. And one of the most key things we do is we get an incredibly rich person to join our group. We need at least one dissident elite that can help us in funding, because money is going to be one of the biggest problems, because we need money to create a legitimate movement. That's just a necessity. And money is something that is hard to come by nowadays. However, I have somebody in mind. I think that if we're looking at dissident elites, Elon Musk is at the very top of our list. We need to start communications with him early on. We have to get people in his circle and work our way up and try to get him part of the movement. Try to get him jumping onto these funding operations. It is so important that we get a major figure like Musk, who has a large amount of wealth and a large amount of influence, involved, because that is going to be very important for the next part of this plan. We're also going to have to frame any potential conflict as a crusade, right? We have to frame it as a crusade for God, because, this is going to unify our people without having to idolize a man. Because when you start idolizing men, you are starting to put yourself in a position where you're no longer putting God first and Christ first. Everything we do has to be Christ first, or this movement, to be honest, won't actually work. If we put man first, we are putting ourselves in the risk of ending up just like the current United States is. The current United States, it puts the self first, it puts man first. We don't want to do that. We need to be a Christ first nation, and we start this by creating our support with a crusade in mind, right? We are creating this nation not for ourselves, but so the work of God can be done through us. One of the most important things we do as well, in order to limit outer nations from jumping in, right? We need these permissive outer nations. We need to not spread anti-Canadian and anti-European rhetoric. We need to stall outside intervention as long as possible. We need to make sure it's pretty clear we are an isolationist movement, right? We aren't trying to hurt these other nations. We are trying to put us first while not taking away all support from them. Is that what we'll do? We'll see. We'll figure that out once we get there. But again, we have to make sure we're not being anti-Canadian, anti-Australian, anti-European, all these countries that are allies of the United States, because we don't want them to intervene for as long as possible. Another thing we need to do once we start getting more funding and more support, we need to start meeting with ambassadors from other conservative nations, which would potentially be on board with this. One of which, as I said before, is Norway, a nation that is going more and more conservative over time, right? They're one of their biggest conservative parties, just gained massive amounts of support, right? They just got a bunch of political power inside their government in a unprecedented election. We can also meet with countries, ambassadors from like Russia and China, right? These countries probably won't support us, but they would support the um, breakdown of the American empire as it is. So they would likely support us in any kind of movement. Once we do that, once we start to garner some support from outside nations, this is when we start beginning protests. We need to start, unifying our people, outbreaking protests, that sort of thing. We have to start small, and we have to be peaceful, especially when any cameras are around, to keep support going on. Again, we want to limit government intervention. while creating support for us, while getting our name out there. Now, with all the funding that we got and with these key figures that we managed to reach, we have to start funding politicians that support our movement. We have to, play the role of a lobby. We have to start lobbying in our politicians with this money that we've raised from different groups, potentially, you know, key figures. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just going to say key figures. And we use this money to start funding politicians in key states. This should be done specifically in the states that I've come up with: Texas, Tennessee, North Dakota, and Utah. Some of those may sound a little wild. I'm sure most of you understand Texas, Tennessee, right? Those are two states, young population, very conservative, can definitely be done there. Texas, one of the biggest states we have, one of the biggest states that we may be able to get on our side, and has a legitimate secessionist movement that already exists there. Same kind of goes for Tennessee. North Dakota and Utah, I have a feeling more of you are going to be skeptical about, but hear me out here, right? North Dakota, one of the youngest states in the nation, same goes for Utah, who are the youngest states in the nation, Midwest, so if we can get them on our side, we can likely get other Midwest states to follow. And these are very, very conservative states as well. So, look, they're young, so they have the revolutionary spirit. Utah, especially, right? Utah's already tried to secede before. I mean, yeah, Mormons, right? They're crazy. I'm joking, I'm joking. But yeah, North Dakota and Utah, young, have the revolutionary spirit, very, very conservative, and geographically would help in creating a larger movement that would spread throughout the Midwest because, one is more on the West Coast while one is more in the North. So, we have two different spread out states that are young and conservative. And then we may add some other specifically Midwest states because that's going to be the harder group to create a legitimate secessionist movement. But that's all going to be based on funding, right? It's going to take a lot of money to get politicians in that would support this type of thing in all four of these states. We also, once we start, getting our politicians in power, we start encouraging the growth of state defense forces in the Midwest and South. We need to increase police funding and increase training. That way, these states have a legitimate way to protect themselves if, they end up leaving the unionist movement. We have to ensure we don't get wiped out before all else. A side that can't lose will win the day. And that's simply it. And, we begin the secessionist movement, starting with Texas and likely North Dakota. I have a feeling those are our two big states, one in the South to start the spark, one in the Midwest to start a spark that can carry through, right? We need this spark. We need it strong to ignite the fire. We need to set up defenses immediately before all else, and we have to put in a temporary martial law. We have to not expand. Expansion is not needed, and it will result in our defeat. We won't have the same funding, we won't have the same outside support as the unionists. So we have to be very, very, very careful. We have to put defense first before all else. Focus on creating a sustainable state which can defend itself. If needed, due to a U.S. counter-offensive, we can attempt to get some of these allied nations that we're talking about before involved. Only if needed, though. This needs to be prefaced. Only if needed, we need to avoid major conflict at all costs. Best case scenario, we manage to create a secessionist movement which is peaceful, at least moderately peaceful, at all costs, except surrendering. Surrendering is the only time. Once we get to the point where we'd have to surrender, then we can start considering conflict. But look, we don't want conflict. It would be bad. It's brother against brother. We don't want to fight other Americans, even if they're, against everything we stand for. And likely, best case scenario, this movement goes well. There'd probably have to be some rebordering done between states and such. And, we'd probably be willing to give up a little ground, take a little ground. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I don't want to worry about that right now. Right now, we just need a solid victory plan. And that's what I've presented for us now. And that's how we win. That is how we do it. We put, defense first. We ensure that we can't lose. We make sure that we have enough strong points that they can attack, and we can actually come out of this on top. We have to learn from previous revolutionary movements. We have to learn from the First Civil War, see why the secessionists failed, and we have to capitalize on their weaknesses. We have to capitalize on our own nation's weaknesses. And if we play this right, play the timing right, it can be done. So there you go, you know. I don't think a lot of people want the dissolvement of the United States as we know it because we love this country, but it is a satanic empire at this point, being completely honest with you. They are willing to send our young boys to die. Our politicians are corrupt. Everybody is a devil worshiper that has any power in this nation. And if we want to have a state that actually puts Christ first, we have to be the ones to make a difference. And we have to start considering a revolutionary movement. We have to start considering why maybe the first Civil War happened and think, is this something that may be necessary once again? And can we escape before our empire inevitably falls due to its inherent evilness? Because evil only can corrupt and never creates. So, do we want to be those who are corrupted, or do we want to be those who create? That is our option in the current era. But on that note, I'm going to end this video. So if there's anything else you'd like to leave, anything that you think I left out, go ahead, let me know in the comments. Uh, I appreciate y'all for supporting the video. And yeah, like, subscribe if you thought it was interesting. That way we can get that message out there. And yeah, I'm logging off. So join the Discord server if interested. Link will be in the description. Also follow me on Twitter and Rumble. But on that note, I'm heading out. So long, peace out, and God bless y'all.